Welcome to Metabolic Matters Podcast, where we embark on conversations with thought leaders, disruptors, change agents, and passionate souls. Together, we'll delve into what truly matters to them. And you'll learn how to metabolize this newfound wisdom so you can transform your own metabolic health. Now let's meet today's guest. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. And I'm very excited about our guest today. This woman I had heard of for a long period of time, just in the realm of the work I do in the mindfulness space and the wellness and healing art space. Dr. Shapiro's name was no stranger to me. I was a little starstruck when I got to actually meet this beautiful human being in person at a big festival in the Maldives. Yes, rough life, last fall. And I fell madly in love with her and her beautiful partner in crime, William, at this event. And the one thing that struck me about Dr. Shapiro and what you will learn as well is when you meet her, she treats you like you have known each other forever. In fact, the first time she ever texted me with her "Good morning, I love you," I literally thought I was the only person on the planet who got that beautiful start to the day. And it's just so special. And even once you learn that this is just who she is and how she shows up with everybody in their life, you still can't help but feel special in her presence. So Dr. Shauna Shapiro, thank you so much for bringing your beautiful essence to this community and talking to us a little bit about mindfulness today.
Thank you. Best introduction ever.
A very, very heartfelt one because you have a very calming and grounding way about yourself. And I'd love for people to get a sense of how did you get like this? Because maybe you were born with it, but I know a little bit about your story to know that you had quite a journey to come to this place where you are today. Do you mind sharing a little bit of your background?
Yeah, thank you. So I definitely wasn't born like this, and I'm not always like this. So I want to say both of those. Um, However, I have discovered some practices that really support me in finding calm and finding peace and finding compassion in the midst of hard times. And kind of my journey into this really began when I was young. I was 17 years old. And I had spinal fusion surgery. So I had a metal rod put in my spine. And it was an unexpected surgery. I had scoliosis, but it was pretty well managed. I had to wear a brace during high school, which is its own story of how challenging that was. But my scoliosis was under control. But then I went through a growth spurt, and pretty much overnight, my curvature had gotten so bad it was about to puncture my lungs. And so my surgeon said we had to operate. And I went from this healthy, active 17-year-old captain of my volleyball team to lying in a hospital bed, unable to walk. I was in the hospital bed for 6 months, and I felt like my entire life had been pulled away from me, that my dream had always been to play volleyball in college, and I never played volleyball again. And the physical pain was difficult, right? I just had surgery. So I remember even just turning my head was so painful. But what really got me was the emotional anguish, this sense of hopelessness and despair and kind of no way out. And it was at that time my father gave me a book about mindfulness. And I'll never forget the very first sentence said, "Whatever's happened to you, it's already happened. The only thing that matters is now what." And it was as if this path opened up, that there was hope, that I had choice, that I wasn't stuck. And I started reading everything I could about mindfulness. And eventually, about a year and a half later, once I had healed enough, I went to Thailand to a monastery to actually practice mindfulness and meditation. And it was really at that monastery and the healing that I experienced there through these practices, that I decided to dedicate my life to studying mindfulness, and came back and got my PhD and became a professor. And it's been 25 years, and I feel so grateful. Yeah.
Amazing. And it's not like you got a Cracker Jack box PhD either. You got your PhD and you now
work and practice. Is it Stanford? Is that what I understand is where you do a lot of your lecturing and
Yeah, so
teaching today and research?
at Santa Clara University, which is right down the road from Stanford, and then we do a lot of our research at Stanford. And
Amazing.
you're right. I got my PhD in clinical psychology and study in neuroscience because meditation, especially back then, was so kind of alternative and fringe that I
Mm.
knew I had to have rigorous science behind me to really be able to share this in a meaningful way with other people. So I've actually dedicated most of my life to the science of mindfulness. I've published over 150 scientific articles and 3 critically acclaimed books. And the reason behind that was really to build trust so that people didn't have to take my word for it, but they could look at the scientific data and that would inspire them to practice.
I love that. I feel like that's actually what intrigued me about you before I ever met you was I too get put into the category of maybe being fringe or alternative in some way, and yet I'm a science geek, right, at my core. And so to run across your beautiful blend of the the heart and the mind, the intellect as well as the intuition, the science as well as the anecdote, you have brought all of these together in such a way. In fact, you talked about 3 of your books. I've got 2 of them at least that I have here, which is one, your Good Morning, I Love You. Like I said, you feel very special when you get this greeting from Dr. Shapiro. And I promise you that it's like it puts a little butterfly in your belly. But this is such a tool. Like this right here, you guys, is like so loaded with pearls around how to weave this into your day to day. And so before we dive into some of these tools, I want you to give us a little bit about how self-love impacts, or how does it land in the context of health and well-being?
Yeah. So it's interesting. So self-love was not where I started. I really started with
Oh,
mindfulness and a very rigorous kind of almost like mental fitness training. Like, how do you train your brain to focus, to be present? Because as most of us have noticed, our mind is constantly wandering off. In fact, research from Harvard shows it wanders 47% of the time. So about half of your life, you're spaced out. So the first thing that really kind of I focused on was, how do you train your brain? How do you stabilize your attention in the present moment? And
wow.
as I was training my mind through meditation practice, what I started to notice is I was really judgmental and critical, that I was kind of beating myself up every time my mind would wander. And not just that, as I started to focus more, I started to notice, oh, I'm shaming and judging myself kind of all the time, like never feeling quite good enough or like I'm doing it right. And so when I was at the monastery, I remember meeting with one of the monks and telling him how my practice was going. And he looked at me and he said, "Oh dear, you're not practicing mindfulness. You're practicing self-judgment, impatience, frustration."
Wow.
And then he said these 5 words, and this for me is the heart of it all. What you practice grows stronger. Whatever you practice grows stronger. So if I'm meditating in a judgmental, striving, frustrated way, I'm just growing these neural pathways of judgment and frustration.
Mm,
He helped me understand that mindfulness isn't just about this focus or paying attention. It's about how you pay attention. And
mm,
that's where the self-love comes in. It's about paying attention with kindness, with curiosity, with compassion, where I'm welcoming everything. And
mm,
that changed everything. Bringing kindness changed everything. So at the monastery, when I would feel pain, which, I'd had surgery, so of course I was going to still feel pain. Instead of hating my pain or pushing it away, I would welcome it with kindness. Like, "Oh, sweetheart, you're in pain." Or, I was only 19, 20 years old. It was my first time ever out of the country away from my parents. And I remember really missing my mom. And instead of being like, "Oh, God, you're such a baby," I would be like, "Oh, you miss your mom." So there is this
mm,
kind attention that started to infuse everything. And by the end of the months that I spent at the monastery, I felt a peace and a contentment that I'd never felt before. And
wow.
I still had back pain. I still had surgery. Nothing had changed in my outer world, but something had shifted internally. And when I came back to the US to get my PhD and to start as a clinical psychologist, I was really struck by the fact that everyone I was working with also had these same feelings of shame and self-judgment and this constant sense of like that, that inner critic of like, I'm not doing it right. I'm not good enough. And so I became curious, like, what happens when you shame yourself? What happens when you judge yourself? Does it make you a better person? Does it make you eat healthier or exercise more?
Mhm.
And what I learned is that shame doesn't work. Shame literally can't work because when we shame and judge ourselves, it shuts down the learning centers of our brain and literally keeps us stuck in the very behaviors we're trying to change.
Wow.
And so
Wow.
this is where this understanding of self-love and self-compassion really kind of came into being, is that when we treat ourselves with kindness, even when we've made a mistake, even when we're not doing it right, and this doesn't mean we let ourselves off the hook, but we're kind, we're compassionate. It releases oxytocin, which is that beautiful hormone of love and safety, which is really important because if we're going to learn, we have to feel safe. And it releases dopamine, which is that powerful neuromodulator of motivation and learning. So kindness actually creates this like chemical cocktail that puts us in an environment to learn and heal. So this is why self-love is really the kind of the secret sauce to healing.
Huge. And I mean, in your research, can you heal? Can you truly bring about healing on the physiologic or the even anatomic level if you are revving in a different sauce than that? I mean, do you find that it's very difficult to change that experience? And maybe
Yeah, I
speak to some
think
of those physiologic or biochemical findings that, I mean, you speak so beautifully about the oxytocin and dopamine piece, but I'm imagining there's a lot of other cascades of metrics that you could look at.
absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, all you have to look at, first of all, is what happens when you're judging and shaming yourself, right? It leads to this kind of flood of adrenaline and norepinephrine and cortisol, right? Floods your system. And we know that if this is chronically happening, it's terrible for you. And not only that, when it happens in these circumstances, it shuts down the learning centers. It literally shuttles all of your resources to survival pathways. And so not only are you unable to learn, you're in this chronic state of fight or flight or freeze and the stress response, which is so unhealthy. Now, self-compassion and this kind of chemical cocktail of what I call just kind attention, when you look at people, when you even just look at brain scans after 6 weeks, you start to see shifts in the areas of the brain that have to do with compassion, attention, learning, memory, right? That this has huge impacts. And even, we've seen the shifts in telomeres, in the length of telomeres. It's actually what you see is shifts in the enzyme telomerase, which is responsible for the growth of the telomeres. And telomeres, as many people know listening, are really the best physiological marker we have of aging. And they are not only correlated with age. So if you're older, you have shorter telomeres. And if you're younger, you have longer ones, but also with stress. So one of, I think, the most interesting studies is when you see these young soldiers coming back from war and they're in their 20s and they're strong and they're healthy, and you look at their telomeres, they're short. The telomeres are short because of the chronic stress. And what's so exciting and hopeful about this new research is that people who practice mindfulness and self-compassion meditation, actually their telomeres lengthen. It's really extraordinary.
Oh my gosh, that's huge. I mean, that speaks so much. I mean, we are in what scientists would call an era of despair. And that our longevity in the United States, at least, we're the only developed country in the world where our longevity is actually diminishing year by year for
Yeah.
the last 5 years. And it's thanks to suicide and opiate overdose. I think this speaks volume to the lack of self-compassion, the lack of mindfulness, the lack of kindness to self and other. Can you speak to this kind of on a cultural level? and
Yeah.
where this work might be of value.
Yeah. Yeah. I think everything you said is true. And I think, it's twofold. One is the lack of kindness toward ourselves. This sense of not being on our own team, right? It's almost like we're our inner enemy instead of an inner ally. And there's a sense of isolation, of separation. And I think it's this loneliness and this divisiveness that is crushing, our health and our well-being. And I think what happens when we are not kind and compassionate with ourselves, we're practicing those neural pathways, then we're not kind and compassionate with others. And in fact, one of my favorite studies, actually, there's a couple that are coming to mind right now that I think are so important. So one is when you look at therapists, right? So I train therapists. That's what I do as a professor. And when you look at therapists and you have them rate, how compassionate are you with yourself? And how compassionate are you with your patients? And then you have independent raters videotape the therapist and watch them. Therapists who rate themselves as kind of harsh and judgmental towards themselves, but compassionate with their clients, it's not how it works. If you're harsh and critical towards yourself, you're going to be harsh and critical with your clients.
Ooh.
Therapists who rate themselves as compassionate towards themselves, they were rated as more compassionate with their clients. So,
Wow.
as I said before, what that beautiful, wise monk said to me, what you practice grows stronger. If you're practicing beating yourself up all day, you're not going to then be able to turn it on for other people to be compassionate. So that's one thing. Self-compassion is far from being selfish. It actually makes us more compassionate. The other thing is, and this is really fascinating, we talked about kind of culturally this sense of not being kind with others and the divides that are happening. We're seeing it across the world right now. I mean, it's incredibly heartbreaking. So when you bring people into a laboratory and you measure their compassion for other people, and then you measure compassion for other people who are different than them. So I'll give you a simple example. You have someone come in who looks like me. They stub their toe. I'm all hooked up to these monitors measuring my brain. My insula gets activated and I'm like, oh, ouch, you stubbed your toe. Then you bring someone in who looks different than me or who is different than me, and I see them stub their toe. My insula stays quiet, which means I don't feel as much compassion. Now, it's not because I'm a prejudiced, horrible person. I literally am hardwired like that. What's so exciting about this new research is when we do a 15-minute mindfulness intervention, and then we bring people back into the laboratory, the insula gets activated whether or not you're similar or different. So
Wow.
we can start to train compassion for other people, even for people who are different. And so I think the key here is learning to practice compassion for ourselves, learning to be present, and that shifts how we are in the world, right? We're never just practicing for ourselves. Everything we do kind of echoes into the universe.
Wow. Which also, to me, elucidates the power of practicing this on yourself will only pay it forward in a way, like you
Yes.
said, whatever you focus on, you create. And so if you're
Yes.
focusing on self-compassion, this is what you're putting into the world, which impacts other people's compassion. I mean, it's a positive forward moving.
It's an upward spiral. It's absolutely an upward spiral. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. And the opposite is true. Like if you, because of the nature of the world we're in right now, I think everyone could probably get a sense of the polarity and the us and them, the disconnect.
Yes.
Man, it's, I've seen so many studies, and maybe you could speak to that, of just where you can watch entire regions, crime rates diminish by a group meditation or a prayerful group
Yeah.
experience. Do you recall some of those studies offhand to share?
Yeah,
Because those
most of the
always blow my
studies have
mind.
been, they've been with transcendental meditation. Most of the studies, they've done a lot. They did some in Washington, D.C., and looked at crime levels. The other studies that are similar to what you're talking about were done at UCSF, and they were really done with loving kindness and prayer and looking at the impact when you receive prayer in terms of healing and well-being. So I think these practices are incredibly powerful. But for me, the science isn't quite there yet to say this is definitive, but I'll tell you what is definitive.
Cool.
When you are sending loving kindness to someone, when you are wishing someone well, when you are saying, may you be peaceful, may you be happy, and you measure this person's physiology, who am I as I'm sending out loving kindness? I am healthier. And what the research, this is from Dr. Barb Fredrickson, has unequivocally shown is that practicing love and kindness is healthy for you. It strengthens your immune system. It reduces stress. It reduces depression. And so again, this upward spiral, it's like, as I'm sending love into the world, I'm healing myself. We're connected. It's never separate. In fact, it's an impossibility, right, to be separate, that we're part of this web of life from which we can never fall.
Like mind-boggling. I mean, truly, because you kind of you know it on one level. I think if we really tap into our intuition, we understand this, we know this, we feel this, we experience this, but that there's actually been studies done on it that you can change.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm imagining, because of in our community, for instance, a lot of our folks are hooked up to HRVs, the heart rate variability devices.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of folks are hooked up to things like continuous glucose monitors, and those are measurable ways to see what stress, lack of compassion, lack of trust, polarity creates in your physiology to what
Right.
you're describing on the other side. You can watch someone self-regulate
Right.
change. I mean, I'm sure there's got to be tons
Absolutely.
of
And
HRV studies and whatnot of what you can change in a biofeedback type of environment just with this practice.
exactly. And I think the key takeaway for people is your attention is your most valuable resource.
Yeah.
So to watch carefully your mind, where are you putting your attention? Are you putting it on negativity? Are you putting it on stress? Are you putting it on worry? Are you putting it on hatred and divide? Those impact your physiology in a very different way than gratitude and kindness and generosity. And I want to be clear, and I say this to my patients all the time, this does not mean that we pretend to be happy. This
Good.
does not mean that we push away negative emotions, right? As human beings, we're going to experience the full spectrum, the full range. What mindfulness does is it gives you the resources, the tools to be present with all of it, right? So when fear comes up, how do I deal with fear? How do I deal with setbacks? How do I deal with pain?
Yeah.
We have the tools to deal with it. And I can take you through some of those tools. When joy comes up, instead of missing it because I'm focusing on the negative, I'm able to receive it fully, to savor it, and to actually benefit from it. So, and one of the things I did want to talk about is, how we can use mindfulness and self-compassion when we're facing something difficult, because I know a lot of the people that are listening and a lot of the people that you and I work with are facing really challenging times. So I wanted to give these 3 steps because they're really kind of bringing into action everything you and I've been talking about. So the first step is, when I'm in pain or when I'm afraid or when I'm whatever the difficulty is, the key is to begin by just naming it, just acknowledging what's true. So I'm scared, or I'm angry, or I feel helpless. When you name an emotion, and this is a study done at UCLA, when you name an emotion, it actually calms down your physiology. You can see it in the heart rate variability. You can see it in blood pressure. You can see in even the EEG monitoring. So the study at UCLA was really brilliant. They showed the participants these horrible images, right, of people starving and children, in accidents and all these things. But half the group, they said, is it a male or a female in the image? And the other half, they said, what emotion are you feeling? So half of them named their emotion, half that just observed. And then they were hooked up to all sorts of physiological monitors. And what they found is, when you name an emotion, it literally calms down the physiology.
Wow.
So that's the first step. Name it to tame it. Okay. Name it to tame it. That's what you do. You name it to tame your physiology. The second step is, instead of immediately trying to get rid of it or fix it, you bring kindness to yourself. Just like you would a dear friend who is struggling with something, you would just say, oh, sweetheart, this is hard. I'm here. I care. And I even instruct my patients and do this myself. I put my hand on my heart. First of all, it releases oxytocin. So I get that little kind of boost, but also just that physical sense of, that gesture of self-care, of I care, I'm here. And then the third step, and I think this is the most powerful, is what's called common humanity. It's where in that moment of pain, I think about all the other people who might be facing something similar.
Wow.
Okay. And I want to be really clear. This doesn't mean you think about all the other people in pain and then you're like, oh, I shouldn't feel bad because they're worse off than me. This is not a comparison thing. This is literally thinking about, so for example, I was working with a woman with breast cancer and we went through the first step. She named her emotions, fear, anger, helplessness, despair. And then we tried to bring kindness to herself and she couldn't quite connect with that. So we were kind of struggling. And then we did the third step. And the third step was thinking of all the other women in this moment who were recently diagnosed with breast cancer and sending out to them what she most needed. So sending them compassion, courage. I'm on your team. I'm rooting for you. And we would do that with each exhale. And then each inhale, offering that back to herself. Courage, compassion. I'm rooting for you. I'm on your team. So you send out exactly what you most need. And then you breathe it back into yourself. And this practice is what helps you not feel so alone. You're like, oh, I'm not the only one. And it helps you connect with exactly what you most need and to feel your power that I am not helpless. I can still send out my love and my strength and my support. And then I can breathe it back into myself. So this is this 3-step practice that is really the self-compassion practice that begins with mindfulness, naming what you're feeling, comes into kindness and soothing, and then this common humanity is the final step.
Oh my gosh, this is so huge. And what you're also insinuating here is that this can be taught to everyone and can be learned by everyone. It's available to all of us.
Absolutely. And I mean, I love this practice so much. I practice it every day and it doesn't have to be with like big things. So the other day I got a flat tire and I am someone who schedules things like one thing after another. So if you get a little wrench in the plan, it's like the whole day blows up. I get this flat tire and I start panicking. I'm like, no, this can't happen. I'm so frustrated. And then I was like, oh, I'm going to do my practice. So first name it, frustration, and also probably fear that I was going to let other people down. Second, bring kindness, sweetheart. It's okay. I'm here. And then third, I thought of all the other people in that moment who had a flat tire because there's probably thousands. And I was like, may the tow truck come quickly and may you get to where you need to go on time. And may I get to where I need to go on time. So there was this sense of like, I'm not the only one. And it brought kind of a little levity to the situation as well.
I love that. I love that so much. And what do you say? Because I'm assuming, because in the field that I'm in, people are very comfortable talking about, the physical metrics, blood tests, epigenetics testing, tissue assays. But when we start to touch into the drop in the bucket around mental and emotional awareness and regulation, why do we have such a block to that? Why is there such a discomfort from many in the scientific community or many in the medical community to even acknowledge that this is, first of all, important, and second of all, something that we can actually harness as an ally, as a tool in our healing process? Where do you think that disconnect is?
Such a great question. So I think it stems from the fact that most people in the medical community are so disconnected from their own emotions, right? We're taught as healthcare professionals to distance because we don't want to burn out. We don't want to be overwhelmed. And what's so interesting is, we all know that didn't work, right? It doesn't work to numb because you can't selectively numb. And so if you start numbing out the pain, you numb out the joy, and then you just feel so disconnected. Wow. But what we also were afraid of was burnout is real. And some of my favorite new research that came out of Switzerland, the University of Switzerland, I think really gave us the key, the answer of what we need to do. So when you feel empathy for someone in pain, the pain centers of the brain light up. And that makes sense. We have these mirror neurons. I see you in pain and I love you. So I say, oh, ouch, I'm in pain too. When you feel compassion for someone in pain, the positive reward centers of the brain light up. So this is interesting. So empathy lights up the pain centers. Compassion lights up the reward centers. So empathy means I'm just feeling your pain. Compassion means I'm connecting with my care for you. I'm connecting with the love, and it actually lights up the neural circuitry of joy, even in the face of suffering. So what I teach my students who are becoming therapists, and when I work with physicians and when I work with nurses and healthcare professionals, I teach, how do you use empathy as a gateway to compassion? Because if you can find your way to compassion, you are putting this protective suit around yourself where you can be with suffering. And I think for all of us who have loved ones who are going to suffer or are suffering, because all of us are going to grow old, get sick, and die. I mean, that's the truth of life.
Guaranteed. Yep.
We need to know how to be with suffering. And the solution is not to cut ourselves off from it, but the solution also isn't to get so overwhelmed that we burn ourselves out. It's to touch the pain, right? That lights up the pain centers, and then to keep going and to love more fully, to let ourselves feel more, not by focusing on the pain that the other person is feeling, but on our love for them. That is the protector.
What a totally different thing, because you hear, and to your point, I mean, in medical school, we were taught, don't connect, don't touch your patients, don't get too close, don't offer hope. Be careful with that. Like all these things, it's so weird, especially if that's just your nature. If you are compassionate by nature, that is sort of suppressed. If you are empathic by nature, you can be sick every time. Like I will tell you, in my first years of practice, I came home with every symptom of every patient I ever saw, right? And I was certain I had every disease of every patient I saw. And that's empathy. I'm taking it on. I love how you framed that. I never thought about that difference. But when you talk about compassion, it's so much about, I see you, I love you, I'm here for you. And I can hold space to encourage you to come over to my side where it's a little sunnier on this side. Yeah.
Right. And it's really like emotional alchemy. It's like you're taking the pain and you're not pushing it away. You're transforming it into love and healing. And you're teaching, right, ourselves and our patients that, emotions rise and pass, right? Don't get lost in those. Go deeper underneath the fear and feel your love and your care and your desire to heal and your desire for this person to heal. And that's really the practice.
I love this. And one of the things I got excited about, of course, in reading your book, I want to just tell people a few of the chapter titles, because there's, like I said, there are so many nuggets in here. So one of them is just the 3 pillars of mindfulness. So intention, attention, attitude. That's one of your big ones. And that's like a really foundational piece here that I think is a good starting point. And then you really do hone in on when the going gets tough, when you have the setbacks, when you're facing those challenges. I really love that you mentioned, like, this is not about the power of positive thinking, because that's bullshit, right? Like that can actually be pretty toxic. Positivity is a thing. Could you speak to that difference again? Like you mentioned it a little bit, but touch on that toxic positivity, as well as just being I don't know if realist is the word. I'd love to hear your take on this.
Yeah. So, toxic positivity, I can really speak to that because when I was in college, I went to Duke University, and it was just the beginning of psychoneurobiology and psychoneuroimmunology. And I was taking this incredible seminar with the president of Duke University, Dr. Brody, who was this incredible psychiatrist. But I was learning that if I had negative thoughts, right, that I was basically going to get cancer. Like that was like if I have this type of personality, or if I have this type of thinking, I was going to get cancer. And I was 18 years old and terrified. And I was like, think happy thoughts, think happy thoughts, think happy thoughts. But, there are lots of things that happen at that age where you're depressed and you're lonely and you're anxious. And I was like, no, that's going to, I was terrified of it. And then, I was introduced to mindfulness, and really at the monasteries where I learned to welcome everything, all of it, and to trust that I had the strength and the courage to face the anxiety and the depression, and also how to welcome the joy and the beauty. Because what I've noticed is that people push away the bad, but they don't actually know how to experience or receive the good. And what mindfulness does is helps us kind of experience all of it and welcome all of it, so that the toxic positivity, there's no forcing, right? There's no pushing to feel happy all the time. It's allowing yourself to feel what you feel. Now, having said that, I really do want to emphasize that there are practices to incline your mind towards the good that are incredibly powerful. So I think it's perfectly okay to consciously choose to focus on gratitude, or to consciously choose to practice loving kindness. That's not faking happy. That's actually like growing these muscles. I mentioned mental fitness training, and that's how I see it, is we're strengthening these areas of goodness, so that we have a natural capacity to feel them more. But it doesn't mean that we push away the bad.
I love that. It's like basically all is welcome here. But again, going back to those very first 5 words that monk said to you, like whatever you focus on will grow. And so you
Yes.
can, if you have been inclined to be that sort of Debbie Downer, by default, that you've kind of seen the glass half empty your whole life, you can change that. And it's not about
Absolutely.
being, like you said, like fake positivity or false positivity. You really can exercise and move that. And one of the things I think is so interesting is like when I saw your book that you wrote for kids, and I'm going to show everybody this one too, because first it's so good, because this piece here, I think about the emotional resilience of our youth, or the lack thereof. And this world around them, they have levels, stressors and experiences that I don't think any previous generations have experienced. And
Yeah.
we went from kind of the total hands-off, stoic parenting of the 1940s, 50s, and 60s into sort of the go and raise yourself of the 70s and 80s, to the hovercrafting, helicoptering of the 90s and 2000s. And now we're kind of in this place of, I have no idea what to do here. And everyone's like, either end of the spectrum is a problem. You have brought a tool to the table first of all, this is just as much for adults as it is for kids, which I think is so beautiful, this book. But you're bringing a tool that brings a conversation to the family space, to start to welcome emotions, to start to encourage a mindfulness at a very young age. Could you speak to what inspired you to write this book, and what you're seeing, what our youth are facing today, and how tools like this could change their experience?
Yeah, I so appreciate this. And I think my model of parenting, and we have 4 kids, my husband and I, so we have a little experience, but has really been skills based. Because, as a neuroscientist and clinical psychologist, when you look at the development of the brain, childhood is this incredible time where you can basically imprint skills. And even those first 7 years, the brain is in a theta state. It's basically hypnotizable.
Yeah.
Right? It's a sponge. And so I realized, why aren't we teaching our children about mindfulness and self-compassion at an early age, so that they build these muscles, this resilience that can serve them through their whole life? And so Good Morning, I Love You, Violet, the children's book, is really about a young girl's journey into self-compassion and all the ways she criticizes and judges herself, until she finally finds this pathway of compassion. And I love that you said it's for adults too. And I'll tell you, when the book first came out last year, We had a little kind of family thing at my parents' house, and my dad, who's 78 years old and relatively stoic, is reading the book out loud to all the kids and grandkids. And halfway through, he starts tears coming out of his eyes, and I think he identified with sweet little Violet criticizing herself, like he was like, oh God, we're so hard on ourselves, all of us, even the sweet young girl. And just that message of self-compassion, I think, is important at any age and for all of us.
Oh, it's so beautiful. It's such a powerful, powerful tool. And you've already given us nuggets, and I'm recommending people go and grab others to dig deeper here. But I'd like you to kind of finish us off with any advice that you might offer in just where do you start in the practice of, I think, the practice of self-love, the practice of self-compassion, because we really could use a nice healthy dose of that these days.
Yeah. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to say is that it's never too late. That no matter, right, there's hope that no matter, what's happened to you, what mistakes you've made, where you are in your life, I think one of the most important and optimistic messages from science of our time is from neuroplasticity. This recognition that our brain is always changing and growing and adapting. And what that means is all of us have the capacity to change in any moment. It's never too late. So the first message is start, just begin. That you can carve out these pathways of kindness and compassion. The second thing is it's not about perfect. It's about practice. It's about 5% more kindness, right? This is a practice that we do every day, and perfection, it's just not even possible. And it's really not even the goal. Perfection is the antithesis of evolution, right? I mean, if you're perfect, you're done. I don't want to be done with this life. I want to keep growing and evolving. So this is a practice. It's not about perfect. And I think the last thing that I would really leave people with, and for me, it's been the most powerful practice. It's why I named the book Good Morning, I Love You, is every single morning to start your day with kindness. And really, just like children are in a theta state at all times, your brain in the morning is in a theta state. As you're transitioning out of sleep, there's a theta window. So before you look at your phone or the news or social media, to not even get out of bed, to put your hand on your heart, to have that moment of connection, of releasing oxytocin, and just greet yourself. Good morning, right? Just greet yourself with kindness. And if you feel really brave, good morning, I love you. And again, it doesn't really matter how you feel. What matters is you're planting the seed. You're carving out this neural pathway of kindness. And over time, it's going to grow because whatever you practice grows stronger.
Girl, you're just beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Last thing, is there anything that you're super excited about right now in the research world, or any projects you're working on that you want to share with all of us?
Oh my gosh, there's so much.
I have a feeling you're not slowing down in one iota. There's so much to do in beautiful ways.
There's so much. I think for me, though, what I really want to bring this understanding of neuroplasticity and that change is possible to the public, to everyone, that this is such a hopeful message. It's hopeful on an individual level, and it's hopeful on a global scale. For people to realize that we can heal wounds, we can heal history, we can shift perspectives, we can open up compassion, right? We can activate the insula in everyone's brain, so that these skills are practical, they're commonsensical, they're simple, right? We're seeing 5 minutes a day, 5 days a week of meditation. You see changes in the brain after 6 weeks. So I'm not talking about going off to monasteries or practicing for hours a day. I'm talking about things that parents and children and people can practice. And so I think my passion right now is how do we translate the science to really bring it to this wider audience of our world?
I love it. Mindfulness for the masses. That's your That's your
That's
jam.
it.
I love it. Dr. Shapiro, thank you so much. And I just want you to know I love you. So thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Metabolic Matters. We hope you found today's conversation insightful and empowering. As we wrap up today's episode, we want to take a moment to acknowledge the incredible team and supporters who make this podcast possible. First, we'd like to thank our production team, Alex Sanchez, Cindy Kennedy, Jessica Gilman, and Lynn Hughes, for their hard work behind the scenes. Our theme song was written by Julie Newmark and performed by Whiskey Flower. And finally, we want to thank you, our listeners, for tuning in and being a part of the Metabolic Matters community. Do you want to learn more? Please visit our website, metabolicmatters.org, and you can follow us on Instagram. If you liked this episode, please leave us a review and share it with your friends and family. And if you want to help support our mission, spreading awareness and knowledge about metabolic health, reach out. We'd love you to join with us. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on upcoming episodes. We have so much exciting content coming your way. Until next time, stay curious, stay empowered, and remember, your metabolic health matters.